Before we get into learning about animals, their traits, and their symbolism, I would like to just take a couple minutes here and talk about those people who have inspired us to love animals, learn more about them, learn more about nature and conservation, environmental friendly things. And this is a tribute to those folks. Of course, there's not enough time to mention everybody who is responsible for such great things. So thank you for watching this, and I hope you learn about a few people that we should appreciate more often. Of course, the first person we have to mention is Noah of the infamous Noah's Ark. The story of Noah's Ark is one of the first we know of about trying to save animals from extinction or being drowned in a flood. He built an ark and brought 2 of each animal on board. Unfortunately, he left out the unicorn. One of the most famous animal advocates is St. Francis of Assisi. He was an Italian Catholic monk who loved animals, and he was able to talk and communicate with them. He aided injured animals, and according to many legends, he saved a village from a wild wolf that was terrorizing the village and scaring the people. He made friends with the wolf, and the wolf became tame, and he is now known as the patron saint of animals. St. Francis of Assisi's feast day is October 4th, and on that day many churches will have a special blessing of the animals, and people bring their animals and they're blessed and they have a little celebration. Many veterinarians and those who work with animals will have a St. Francis of Assisi statue or picture in their offices and workspaces, and many people have a few in their gardens and their homes. Dian Fossey. Dian Fossey was an American conservationist and primatologist who was known for studying mountain gorilla groups in the late 1960s until she was murdered in 1985, and it's still a mystery who murdered her. She spent 20 years in Rwanda, Africa, where she strongly opposed poaching and tourism in wildlife habitats, probably one of the reasons she was murdered. Her research and conservation work helped bring awareness to mountain gorillas, and the movie Gorillas in the Mist was a tribute to her work. Great movie, and she was a great woman. Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall is an English primatologist and an anthropologist, and she's the world's foremost expert on chimpanzees. John James Audubon. John James Audubon was an American painter, ornithologist, and naturalist. He's best known for his paintings of all the bird species in North America, and he's the namesake of the National Audubon Society. The National Audubon Society is a great resource if you're into birds and wildlife. They have books, they have websites, they have centers around that you can go visit if you're into birding. They also have books on insects and butterflies and things like that. You can join them and become a member to help support them, and it's a wonderful society to help preserve birds and wildlife. Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt, also known as Teddy Roosevelt, and he was the 26th President of the United States. But what makes him part of this class is he established the U.S. Forest Service, the nation's first national wildlife refuge, 3 national parks, and dozens of national monuments. And the teddy bear is named after him. John Muir. John Muir is also known as John of the Mountains and Father of the National Parks. He was a Scottish-American zoologist, botanist, and glaciologist. He was an environmental philosopher and one of the earliest advocates for the preservation of wilderness in the United States of America. Jacques Cousteau. I think everyone knows who Jacques Cousteau is. He was a French naval officer and a scientist who became a conservationist, an author, and a researcher. He's probably best known for his research on the sea and its life forms, and he was one of the pioneers of marine conservation. He is referred to as the father of scuba diving, as he helped invent the aqualung, and he had several documentaries out and books out talking about marine life and how to conserve them and the animals that lived under the sea. A very amazing man. Steve Irwin. Steve Irwin is known as the star of the TV show The Crocodile Hunter. He was even referred to as the Crocodile Hunter. He was an Australian zookeeper, environmentalist, television personality, and wildlife expert. And he was a hoot to watch. He was hysterically funny, and yet he had respect for the animals he worked for. He especially liked to work with dangerous reptiles, and he had a way with them. Unfortunately, he was killed in an accident on September 4th after being pierced in the chest by a stingray barb filming a documentary in Australia's Great Barrier Reef. His family has taken on his quest and they continue his work. Ted Andrews. Many people probably don't know who Ted Andrews is. He was an American author, an animal activist, and a teacher of esoteric practices. He was clairvoyant. He could actually speak and talk to animals, sort of like St. Francis. He wrote several books on animals as spirit guides, totems, and their symbolism. They're still available. One of his most famous books is Animal Speak, which I highly recommend, especially if you're interested in this class. He has several decks of oracle cards about animals and birds and symbolism and things like that. He has since passed away, however, his legend lives on. Jack Hanna. Jack Hanna is also known as Jungle Jack Hanna, and he's an American zookeeper and the former director of the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. He made wild animals popular by appearing on late-night shows such as Johnny Carson, David Letterman, and James Corden. He would bring wild animals on the show, and he would talk about them. Sometimes he'd bring like baby tigers, or sometimes crazy things like snakes or monkeys. Sometimes they'd get loose. It was always fun to watch. You learned a lot, and he brought awareness to these animals to an audience that normally wouldn't have that access. So he's still alive. He's retired now, but his legend lives on, just like the rest of these guys. Gerald Durrell. Gerald Durrell was a British naturalist, a writer, and a zookeeper, and a television personality. He founded the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust and the Jersey Zoo on the Channel Island of Jersey. Most people probably will remember his story from the BBC television series, The Durrells. It's a lovely series. It's fun to watch. It's a true story. They've embellished it a little bit, but if you love animals, watch the show. Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg is a young Swedish environmentalist activist who's famous for challenging world leaders to take immediate action for climate change that's happening on the planet. She's a little whippersnapper. She's only 18 years old as I record this, and she is an amazing girl. She was awarded the Time Magazine Person of the Year in 2019. Dr. Dolittle. Dr. Dolittle is probably responsible for my obsession with animals. I watched the old Rex Harrison movie every time it came on TV once a year, because back then we didn't have VCRs or DVDs or anything like that, and it was one of my favorite movies. Dr. John Dolittle is the main character of a series of children's books by Hugh Lofting. The first book was the story of Dr. Dolittle. He was a doctor who learned he could talk to animals, and he traveled all over the world to learn more about them. They're great books. The movie's fantastic. He inspired others. Several movies called Dr. Dolittle, but I have to say the original with Rex Harrison is the best. Chief Dan George. Chief Dan George was the chief of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. It's an Indian preserve in North Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. He was an environmentalist, an author, actor, and musician. So let's thank all the unsung heroes. We didn't have time to put everybody who helped this planet in this video. Let's thank everyone, the animal advocates, environmental warriors, park rangers, those with compassion who work with animals, veterinarians, vet techs, dog walkers, pet sitters, crazy cat ladies, and everyone who does their part to preserve the planet and its life forms. Thank you all for doing your part.